Hello, and welcome to the Thyroid Pharmacist Healing Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Izabella Wentz, PharmD, the thyroid pharmacist. And today we're going to be talking about brain fog, fatigue, and anxiety, how methylene blue, hyperbaric oxygen, and GABA can help you optimize your brain and energy. With us today, I have Dr. Scott Sherr. Welcome, Dr. Scott. How are you doing today?
It's great to be here, Isabella. Thank you for having me.
I'll give you a little bit of background about Dr. Scott. Dr. Scott Sherr is a board certified internal medicine physician, certified to practice health optimization medicine and hyperbaric oxygen therapy specialist. His formal titles include COO of Transcriptions, a line of physician formulated pharmaceutical grade and precision dose buccal troches containing novel ingredients like methylene blue, GABA, and others in formulas for energy focused sleep stress, immune support, and more. He's the VP of Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, the nonprofit arm of Transcriptions, which trains practitioners on optimizing health rather than treating disease. He's also the Chief Medical Officer of One Base Health, a company building software and hardware to power and integrative technology, including hyperbaric chambers, lights, sauna, and more. His clinical practice includes home as its foundation, plus an integrative approach to hyperbaric oxygen therapy that includes cutting edge and dynamic hyperbaric oxygen protocols, comprehensive lab testing, targeted supplementation, personal practices, synergistic technologies, new and ancient, and more. So, Dr. Scott, you're a busy guy, and I feel like your brain has to be fully optimized just to keep up with all of this work.
It keeps me busy, but in very interesting, fun, novel, and exciting ways. So I enjoy the work that I do. It's evolved over many years to kind of what you've just described. But in essence, I'm a clinician, Isabella. I see myself primarily as that and helping people optimize their health and conduct all things on a health optimization journey for patients, no matter where they are on that journey overall. So
How did you get into brain medicine?
one thing I learned a little while ago is that the brain is attached to the rest of the body. Did you hear about this? So,
Like this. I thought it was separate.
so no, I thought they were separate, right? And so it's kind of funny that I learned this. Of course, we all kind of know this intuitively, right? That our brain is, we call it mind body medicine. It's really just medicine, right? It's not like the brain is separate from what things are going on. We know that everything is a feedback loop. The brain is a hugely important organ. It takes 20% of our cardiac output and of our oxygen capacity. And metabolically, it's extremely, extremely important and extremely intensive. It is one of the most intensively packed with mitochondria as far as our tissues go. So mitochondria are energy producing factories, and we have mitochondria in our cells. And in sixth or seventh grade, as I know from my children, you learn about the cell, and you learn that, there's all these organelles in the cell. There's Golgi bodies, and there's lysosomes, and there's a mitochondria, and you get this picture of just one mitochondria in the cell. But that's not the case. Actually, we have thousands of mitochondria per cell in our brain, in our heart, in our liver, in our musculoskeletal tissue. And the most mitochondria per cell, Isabella, do you know, is actually in your eggs and sperm. They have the most mitochondria per cell. And so this energy producing factory is very, very important. And as I learned about cellular medicine, when I was looking at hyperbaric therapy as one of my first inroad into integrative medicine, integrative HBOT was my website. It still is. And it was really my understanding that what I was doing in a hyperbaric chamber was flooding the body with more oxygen and requiring these mitochondria to make more energy. And if they couldn't do it well, and there's lots of different reasons why this couldn't be the case, or this could be the case, then people were not doing as well in the chamber as I anticipated. And so my sort of way in to brain medicine as it really is really mitochondrial medicine, and understanding the inputs of what make mitochondria work well, and the outputs that are required to help the energy production pathways work well, but also the detoxification pathways work well once we make energy. So I guess that's the short story. I'm happy to dig into any of that if you'd like. So
I love that. With hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's, some of the biggest symptoms that people struggle with, I know for me, this was quite intense and debilitating, was like that brain fog and fatigue. And having been somebody that was always like very sharp and on top of things with a great memory, very witty, that was like a really, really hard thing for me to go through where all of a sudden my brain just wasn't all there. I was constantly forgetting words. I was walking into rooms wondering why I had got there. And a lot of people with thyroid issues struggle with this. Now, when I first started looking into like the world of healing, I came into it being a conventionally trained pharmacist, and I got this diagnosis after feeling quite unwell for about 10 years. Great, thyroid meds are going to take care of everything for me, right? Because that's what I learned in school. That was not the case. Spoiler alert. But looking into some of the reasons why people struggle with brain fog and fatigue and energy, like the mitochondrial dysfunction could be at the root of this.
Yeah, and I think that's really what I've realized over the years is that sort of the common denominator of many issues is mitochondrial dysfunction, and the reason for that, they're myriad, and we can talk about them, but some of the statistics are pretty stark. 94% of the U.S. population has some element of mitochondrial dysfunction, and that means that they're not either making energy effectively or they're not detoxing or neutralizing the effects of making energy. And what I mean by that is when we make energy, we also make what are called quote unquote waste products of energy metabolism. These are, we make energy, we make ATP, which is our energy currency. We make about 165 pounds of ATP per day, is what we're supposed to be making. So it's a huge amount of ATP. A lot of this, most of it is obviously recycled very, very quickly. But including ATP, or in addition to ATP, we also make carbon dioxide, we make water, and we also make what are called reactive oxygen species. These are oxygen molecules that are unpaired with electrons. They're more unstable, and they are a signaling molecule. They're signaling molecules that keep the mitochondria working efficiently, hypothetically. But if there's too many of these, or the body doesn't have enough antioxidants to help neutralize the oxidative stress, the reactive oxygen species, that's when the system starts breaking down as well. So, in essence, 94% of the United States population cannot make energy well. They don't have the machinery to make energy well, or they don't have the capacity to detox from the energy that they make. And so, why is this the case? Okay, the number one cause of mitochondrial dysfunction is actually insulin resistance. So, if you're insulin resistant, if your blood sugars are elevated, your mitochondria are taking. So, to take a step back, when our mitochondria are using either sugar or fat mostly to make energy, so we break down sugar into glucose, and then that goes into our what's called our citric acid cycle in our mitochondria, which helps us make energy from that food, make from the glucose, actually basically taking electrons off the food and then throwing them into the mitochondria themselves. Same thing with fat overall. Okay. And so if you have too much substrate, you have too much glucose coming in, it starts making the mitochondria very unhappy. So, and because the mitochondria is like, what do I do with all this energy? I got to stop making all this energy. I got to stop the mitochondria working so well. I got to make it more inefficient, because I don't want it to be making as much energy as we have as capacity. So insulin resistance is number one as causing mitochondrial dysfunction. And you have medications that can do it, medications that can directly affect the mitochondria itself. There's many of these. Two of the most common would be metformin and proton pump inhibitors. These are things that people use for like omeprazole and protonics and things that people take over the counter, which are really significantly affecting on parts of your mitochondria and something called the electron transport chain, where basically the part of the mitochondria that helps you make the ATP itself. You also have toxins in our environment. So these can be in our food, our water, our cosmetics, our plastics, our sheets, our detergents. We can keep going. And then you have also, of course, like your light pollution and other kinds of toxins. You have toxic people as well. Toxic people. This is what Dr. Teto and one of my colleagues likes to say is like, toxic people and the stress, and that can also be a huge effect on your mitochondria. So poor sleep, poor stress, or poor stress management overall. And then you have infections themselves. And so the infections themselves can cause mitochondrial stress. And then post-infectious inflammatory disorders can cause it, like your post-COVIDs, your post-Lyme, and your post-EBV and things like that, mold. Like you have people that have significant mitochondrial stress because of the infection, and doesn't get better even if the infection gets better too. So these are the main reasons why the mitochondria don't work very well. And then the symptoms that you have are related to oftentimes where you have the most mitochondria. So infertility rates going through the roof, people with brain fog, concentration problems, fatigue, memory issues, verbal issues. This is because you have so many mitochondria per cell in your brain. I have a lot of patients over the years that have had issues with exercise induced fatigue. They try to exercise or try to go into a sauna and they can't. And this is maybe an experience that you've had over the years too, right? And this is because of mitochondrial stress. You have a huge amount of mitochondria in your muscle tissue in reserve so that you can hypothetically run away when somebody's chasing after you or something is chasing after you. But what you'll find with people that have mitochondrial stress is that they exercise or they try to exercise and then they're down for the count for days or sometimes longer than that. So in essence, what I do in practice, and this starts with my hyperbaric practice and then my health optimization practice and all the work with methylene blue and GABA as well. This is all related to mitochondrial medicine and understanding how these very small parts of our cell have a huge impact on how we feel.
It's just so interesting. When I got into integrative medicine, I started really looking at, the adrenals, right? And what are the adrenals doing? And a lot of times people with thyroid issues ended up having adrenal issues. And a lot of the things that I would utilize, like the B vitamins, vitamin C, and then I got deeper into like electrolytes, making sure that you're getting great sleep, utilizing some of the adaptogens. And the deeper I kind of got into it, the more I realized a lot of these things aren't just like adrenal support, but they're also mitochondrial support. And my latest book that came out in 2023 was the Adrenal Transformation Protocol, which stands for ATP. I don't think a lot of people like kind of quite got the connection, but I was hoping you might, right?
Nice. Yes. Now that you told me.
um, And I feel like a lot of people just don't realize that they may have heard of like adrenal fatigue or adrenal dysfunction. A lot of that is actually driven by the mitochondria. And I know over the last decade or so, I've been talking to a lot of different practitioners, and some of them have been like, oh, have you heard of this amazing thing for people with thyroid issues? And a few years back, it was like D ribose supports the mitochondria, right? Um, Maybe 5, 6 years ago, carnitine, an article came out about carnitine being utilized for for thyroid fatigue. I've had incredible results with benfotiamine, which is another mitochondrial support nutrient. And it's kind of like when you start putting all the pieces together, you realize how important the mitochondria can be. And again, for people with that exercise intolerance, I think this can be a really, really big red flag. For me, I know I reached out to you initially when I tried some methylene blue, and this was quite incredible. So over the last uh, I guess 7 years, I was like one of those people that got myself into remission and then I was doing really well and teaching everybody else how to stay well. And then all of a sudden I had mold exposure and then COVID. I moved a few times. I went through perimenopause, right? And then I was like, I'm just really having trouble focusing right now. I was working on my book on irritable bowel syndrome and I was like, oh, I just can't focus. And I tried methylene blue and I was like, wow, chapter got like I just finished up a chapter. I've been working on this for a month straight. And this has been something that's been a really big game changer in my routine. Can we talk a little bit about what it is? I know it's trending in the biohacking world, and there's also been some clickbait that we'll talk about as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've been working with Methylene Blue now, myself and the company, my company, Transcriptions, for about 4 years, and Dr. Ted Achacoso, who's the founder of the company, one of these really really smart guys that kind of knows the trends before they're going to happen, kind of thing. And so, but in the sense that he knew that we looked at the research on methylene blue and realized very quickly that this was a profound potential for game changing on the mitochondrial side of things. And it's been around a long time. Methylene blue has been around. It was the first drug registered with the FDA back in 1897. So it was initially made. So it's a synthetic ingredient, it's synthetic dye. So it's not coming from the natural world. And people have to, realize that, and also realize that just because something is synthetic doesn't mean it's bad for you. Just like if something's natural doesn't mean it's good for you. And I had a number of people die on me in the ICUs when I was training because they foraged for the wrong mushrooms. And when you eat the wrong mushrooms and go into liver failure, there's nothing much you can do except for getting liver transplant sometimes. Or if you take, a lot of other natural supplements that may not be very good for you at high levels, or even at low levels, depending on what they are. Cyanide is natural, for example. So,
That's another one, right?
what's that?
Arsenic.
Arsenic too. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So these are so it's important to realize that. So it was a synthetic ingredient. It was developed in the 1870s as a textile dye. It was dyeing blue jeans at that time, and it was a very shockingly blue color, as many of you probably listening know. And so, but in 1897, it became the first drug registered with the FDA because they found out that you could treat malaria with it, and it got this name of what's called the magic bullet at the time. And it got that name because you could give very, very high doses of methylene blue to patients, to humans. You could kill pathogens, but not harm the actual host cells themselves. So the human cells were fine, but the pathogens were killed even at very high levels of methylene blue. And so this really became the first drug used in clinical medicine as an antimicrobial. And so from the 1890s to 1950s, methylene blue was one of the main antimicrobials around. So much so that if you were a World War II pilot and you were, or in World War II, you were going to the Pacific, like the Japan side of the war, you were taking methylene blue prophylactically because you were preventing things like fungal infections, bacterial infections. It's fantastic for gram-negative bacteria, so it was used for urinary tract infections. Now it's coming back into favor for use in that and also for malaria, because a lot of the drugs that we used to use are no longer effective because there's resistant patterns against them with the various organisms. So it had this first epoch, its first chapter, as it called, but a long chapter as an antimicrobial. And then in the 1950s, the first antipsychotics were derived from methylene blue because it also has an effect of being something called a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, MAOI. And what that means is that it increases serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. And so it's a mood booster on itself. And actually, it's been studied in depression and bipolar with significant improvements overall. So in essence, the first way it was actually used as the first antipsychotic drug was derived from methylene blue. And so what they used to do back then is that they used to compound antipsychotics with methylene blue. So they used to put them together. You know this, obviously, as a pharmacist. And then they did this so that they would be sure that people were taking their medications. And how did they know, Izabella? Because they had blue urine if they were taking methylene blue. So there's all these stories. Actually, even one of who's the president? MacArthur. No, is it MacArthur? It was one of the major generals during World War II that had that have these stories about peeing blue in the loo, like in the loo being the bathroom, right? If that's an English expression for the bathroom. So you do have blue urine when you take methylene blue, and so that's how they would know if people were taking their medications. That's kind of like the second chapter or epoch. The third one is that we now know that it's a fantastic mitochondrial optimizer, and it works in so many different ways in the mitochondria, which we can discuss. But in essence, um, it's actually still on the World Health Organization's list of essential medications because of two reasons. One is something called methemoglobinemia, which is basically a disorder where you cannot carry oxygen on your red blood cells. And what methylene blue can do is it change the redox status of iron so that you can actually allow the oxygen to be carried on the hemoglobin, and you can save somebody's life that way. And so every ER in the United States has methylene blue available in IV form. And the other reason it's on the World Health Organization's list of medications is for cyanide poisoning, actually. Cyanide actually destroys a complex on the mitochondria called complex 4. And there's very few things that really will reverse that or temporize that. And methylene blue is one of them. So we now know that, and this is the reason why we got so interested in it as a company, we were the first company that had methylene blue products. The first commercial product in 2020 actually was because we knew from the research that there is a profound potential to help on the mitochondrial side and see fantastic benefit in patients and people using it.
Incredible. I know some people that might be listening might be kind of wondering about mitochondria and this connection. And if you do a Google search about like mitochondrial disorders and dysfunction, you'll come up with things like rare genetic disorders. That's not necessarily the case. So you don't have to have like a rare genetic disorder, which would typically be caught when, you're born, right? Or within a few years, because you wouldn't be thriving as a child. But there are people walking around with various degrees of mitochondrial dysfunction. I know I've used the organic acids test with people, and you can visualize some of that. What are some of the signs and symptoms that might be going on, or some tests that people might utilize? I know you have, like, almost 94% of people have this, and how do people know if it's applies to them?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's a pretty good researcher out there. Actually, I like him a lot. His name's Chris Masterjohn. And Chris did this great 3 hour lecture, deep dive into biochemistry for methylene blue. And I agree with almost all of it, but I disagree with his conclusion, which is that he should only take methylene blue if you have a mitochondrial disorder. What Chris forgot to mention is that, as you just described, there are so many people walking around right now with mitochondrial dysfunction, even if they don't have an inherited mitochondrial disorder. And we know this. This has been well described in the literature. And clinically, this is what we see. And I think what you're describing is what I do in clinical practice too, which is symptomatically, people are going to feel, as we were describing before, symptoms related to where the mitochondria are having the most stress. So if it's your brain, it's going to be the things we described. It's going to be like brain fog, concentration problems, fatigue. If it's your liver, you're going to be having detox issues. If it's your muscle, it's going to be exercise-induced fatigue. If it's trying to have a baby and not being able to have one, mitochondrial dysfunction can be a big part of why that is the case. Because having or creating, especially creating a baby, takes a huge amount of energy overall. So, in essence, what I do in clinical practice is I'm looking at. So the framework I use is something called health optimization medicine. Health optimization medicine was created by Dr. Ted Achikosa, who I mentioned earlier, in his own clinical practice over many years. And the idea was, can you work on optimizing somebody's health without focusing on just treating a disease per se, or working on even the root cause of disease? Can we just optimize our vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and other markers to when we were 21 to 30 years of age, and see if how well we can do by just creating that foundation? So instead of looking at like pathogenesis, like the reasons, like, the disease orientation, it's more what's called salutogenesis, which is like the origins of health. Instead of looking at longevity, we're talking about health span here. So looking at optimizing levels to when we were younger. And the third part is the most important, is instead of looking at an organ like your adrenals or your heart or your brain, changing it to something called the holobiont, or it's called the holobiont is something that is a really cool concept. It's called holobiontology, the idea that we are not just human. We are made up of human cells. We're made up of bacteria, fungus, and virus. We're made up of mitochondria that used to be bacteria. We have other organelles in our cells that came from other locations as well. So the idea is that let's create a way of looking at somebody holistically, not just their human holistically self, but their all of their self. Whatever, if you want to call, you're less human than you are other things if you look at what's inside of you right now or around you, as well, with all the bacteria, fungus, and virus and everything else that's kind of hanging around. So if you're looking at it like a holobiont perspective, the best way to look at that perspective is to look at your metabolomic perspective. And metabolomics is a word that describes looking at your metabolism, or basically the real time understanding what's happening in your cells right now. So looking at the inputs from your environment, looking at the inputs from your cells themselves, and how they all kind of get networked together into the real time understanding of what's happening and what's happening now in your cells. And that's metabolomics. And so a great way to look at metabolomic testing is looking at a piece of that could be organic acid testing, because organic acid testing, what that's doing is looking at what's called urine metabolites of what's happening in your cells right now. And you can measure what's happening in the parts of your cell that are responsible for making energy, including your mitochondria. So you can measure your macronutrients, you can measure your micronutrients like your vitamins and minerals. You can measure the intermediates that are involved in the cycle of making energy in your mitochondria. You can measure how well you are detoxifying. Do you have oxidative stress markers that are elevated? Do you have vitamins that you need to help balance that? Your vitamin C, your vitamin D, your alpha lipoic acid, and others that are important for that. So you can measure all that. So that's how I do it in clinical practice, is that I use it that way. There are some other tests out there that have come out over the last couple of years that are purporting to be able to show you your mitochondrial health overall. I'm just not convinced that they're great yet overall. And this has been the opinion of not just me, but other people in the field as well, that they're new and they're not quite validated yet to say like you can go get like your mitochondrial age or mitochondrial health testing done directly yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. I started doing organic acids test about 8, maybe 9 years ago. I had developed this Hashimoto's protocol where we focused on the liver, adrenals, and gut, and a lot of people got better. But then I had those like clients. I don't know if you have any of these clients that like really just push you to the next level because you're like, gosh, I gave you all of my tricks and all of my tools, and you're like the best client, patient in the world. You're doing everything that I'm saying, and yet you're not getting better. And so I started using the organic acids test on a lot of times people that were not getting better with the traditional things. They had that mitochondrial dysfunction. Maybe they had a lot of times oxalate issues, mold issues, which can disrupt the mitochondria, sometimes H. pylori. And it's been really, really interesting to see because we would take a different approach with them and then they would actually start getting better. But for a while, it felt like, yeah, nothing is helping, nothing is getting better. And one of the things that I've observed that I'm not sure if you have as well is people with like droopy eyelids. To me, like if your eyelids are drooping, I think I read somewhere that the eyelids have a lot of mitochondria. And if you have droopy eyelids, and I know a lot of people are getting surgery for that, that could be a sign of a mitochondrial issue too.
Well, we know that the muscles in our eyes and around our eyes are very, very active all the time. So they're highly metabolic and have, I think, more mitochondria than other muscle groups, at least that are active at any one time. I mean, they're small muscles, but there's a lot of them overall. And so I've definitely found that um, when I think about optimizing somebody and having a hard time, I really want to think about how I can work on mitochondrial function as fast as possible, knowing that using organic acid testing can be helpful, and it is very helpful, but it can take time for people to start feeling better and to start seeing the difference of changing their diet, their lifestyle, getting on some correct supplementation, optimizing their sunlight and their sleep. And these things are not easy for everybody, and everybody wants to feel better tomorrow after feeling bad for 40 years. It's going to take time. And one of the things that I found to be transformative actually is the use of methylene blue in these cases. And so the use of methylene blue in these cases is so important and so helpful, I think, because it can really compensate for any area in the mitochondria that is not working as optimal as it should be. And this could be on the energy producing side, and this can be on the detoxification side too. So it's something called the redox cycler, or electron cycler is another way to say it. And what that means is that methylene blue can help donate electrons, as it were. So donate something specifically to the mitochondria to help you make energy more effectively. And it can do this by compensating for issues on any of the areas that you make energy on the mitochondria. So you have these complexes on the mitochondria. They're called proteins. There's complex 1, 2, 3, and 4. And oftentimes when we have dysfunction, these complexes aren't doing what they're supposed to do. And so what methylene blue can do is it can donate electrons to parts of the mitochondria of these proteins to help compensate or bypass areas where there's blockages. It also can do the opposite. It actually can pick up electrons as well. And it can do this as an antioxidant, just as this is what antioxidants do. Antioxidants pick up electrons, or they neutralize things by picking up electrons overall. So methylene blue can do that directly, but it also can recycle things like NAD and FAD, which are, everybody's heard of NAD these days. NAD is like the fancy thing that everybody's taking, or NMR or whatever it is. NMR is, that's actually something else. That's like I think that's a procedure. But anyway, so what methylene do can recycle your NAD, and NAD is really important because NAD is what is carrying electrons from your food and bringing them to your mitochondria to help you make energy. But if you can't, it donates it to the first complex in your mitochondria. But if your first complex isn't working very well because of something, because of infection, insulin resistance, all the toxins, all the things that we mentioned, then you're not going to be able to get that NAD to recycle itself back to NAD. And so, but methylene blue can do that. It can recycle your NAD so it can go back and to pick up more electrons from your food. And so it can recycle those, regenerate them. So basically, in essence, it's rebooting your mitochondria. It also has this regeneration capacity to the mitochondria as well. And so what I do in clinical practice is that when I'm starting off with somebody, I'll often be giving them, once I get the testing back and we kind of see where they are and see what they need, oftentimes, or at least when they've gotten the test drawn is the idea, like get your testing done so we can see what's happening. And then as soon as the testing is done, then we'll get you started on methylene blue. And then we'll slowly titrate your dose from a very small dose for 6, 8 milligrams, 10 milligrams, low doses of methylene blue, and then slowly increase their dose until they start feeling better. And then as they're starting feeling better, we're getting their testing back, and then we can start getting them on the vitamins, minerals, nutrients, the oxidative stress, or the antioxidants they need to combat the oxidative stress. And then slowly over time, you can wean them off the methylene blue or not use it as often or not as high of a dose as you're optimizing the rest of the system.
That's interesting. I was going to ask you about how to use it. I know I've used it when I have to get like a big project done. Like one of the things I hate doing is cleaning and like organizing. And it's something that just my brain, I'll start cleaning and my husband always teases me because he's like, okay, when you're organizing, I know like halfway through, you're just going to have a bunch of crap like all over and you're just going to be done for the day and you're going to be probably done with that for 2 weeks, right? And it's just going to crap sit everywhere and this is how you organize. And so if I have like a big project or a big to do, I've used methylene blue to kind of help me get through that project. And it's not sometimes when you drink caffeine, you end up like some people power through with caffeine and they end up basically, oh my gosh, they get palpitations and they get anxious and they can't sleep. Where methylene blue just gives you like a calm focus. And for me, it's like all the rabbits that are normally in my brain bouncing around and giving me ideas, they kind of like scatter for a while and go out to pasture so that I can just focus on one task at a time. So I know that's like one way that maybe people use it.
If you're pretty well optimized already, you can use methylene blue more intermittently, as you are, with more of cognitive tasks or physical tasks, including things like endurance. Actually, we have a number of endurance athletes that use methylene blue because methylene blue increases your what's called your aerobic capacity. It allows you to make energy from utilizing oxygen longer because it can work just like oxygen in your cells. And so, if you have less oxygen around, your this is when you start going out of your mitochondria making energy. You're actually going to anaerobic respiration, which is you're going to build up lactic acid and things like that. And so and you have to stop what you're doing. So if you're an endurance athlete and you're trying to go for further, you stop because you can't keep going. But when you have more methylene blue around, it can act just like oxygen in your cells. And so we have people that are using it for endurance. We have great jet lag protocols too, because if you're on an airplane, you're when you're on an airplane, you're pressurized to about 8,000 feet above sea level. And so as a result of that, your oxygen in the air is much lower than it would be at sea level. So you have 21% oxygen in the air where you live in Austin. I live in Colorado. I'm at 5,500 feet. My oxygen level is about 16% overall in the air. And then your body gets used to this. It makes, for me, I'll make more red blood cells so I can carry more oxygen here. And it's also fantastic for jet lag because my change from going on an airplane from being in my home is only 3,000 feet. So compared to being at sea level, but that's a significant amount of stress on the system just because there's less oxygen around, notwithstanding being, more radiation exposure, bad food, bad lighting, stressful people that are coughing on you and all those kinds of things as well when you're on an airplane. But methylene blue can be really fantastic in this case because it's going to mitigate a lot of the potential damage of being on an airplane. It's protecting you from oxidative stress, and it's decreasing inflammation. It's allowing you to make more energy for longer because you have this methylene blue around. So, in essence, long answer to your question is that you can use it more periodically if you're pretty well optimized. This is how I do it, right? I use it when I'm traveling. I use it when I'm under more stress. I do think that there's probably a role for most people to take it on a relatively regular basis, just because most of us are under mitochondrial stress outside of what we would have been in Paleolithic times, let's call it, which is when with these sort of our make and model is still very much Paleolithic in the sense of how our bodies and our brains and our how we evolved overall. We really haven't caught up to the agricultural revolution too much yet, or especially the lighting and the stresses of being on airplanes and EMFs and the toxins in our environment and everything else. So as I was alluding to earlier, we live in synthetic world, so I do think we need synthetic things sometimes to help us and to mitigate some of those synthetic environmental stimuli that we have. And so, there's a way to use methylene blue as you described it, is using it more periodically for when you need it, and then using it more regularly, especially in people with more mitochondrial dysfunction, is something that I found to be very very helpful. And then weaning it down over time can be done as you're optimizing the system.
Well, it's kind of interesting because when I was looking into all of the effects of it, at first I was like, okay, it's just has an effect because I take it and I feel good. But looking through, it also has like antifungal, antimicrobial properties. With Hashimoto's, a lot of times, a lot of the things that are causing Hashimoto's that can trigger Hashimoto's could be infections. And we definitely know, mold and candida are equal opportunity destroyers, but it also has these mild um, I guess, antifungal properties as well, from what I learned, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but that it can actually be part of a long-term treatment plan for somebody who perhaps was mold exposed. It could be like a antifungal.
Yes, exactly. So as I was mentioning in the beginning, this is what methylene blue was used for initially as being and antimicrobial overall. We think that for the most part, lower doses of methylene blue, around 4, 8, 16, 25 milligrams, are not significantly antimicrobial, but they can be for some people. But when you get to up to about a milligram per kilogram, which is about 140, 150 pound, 140, 150 milligrams of methylene blue, I was converting from 70 kilograms to pounds in my brain. Um, so it's about a milligram per kilogram or above, which is about 150 pounds or above. I keep saying that 150 milligrams or above. I'll get there. Um, that that's when it becomes more antimicrobial overall. But again, everybody's gonna be a little bit different, So um, I'm messing up the dosing here. So 70 milligrams per kilogram, sorry, 1 milligram per kilogram, which is about 70 milligrams of methylene blue. Let's just keep it there. Okay. And so, yeah, it's 150 pounds. Yeah. And so I'm just going to, I think I might have confused everybody there. So I want to get back. Um, so about 1 milligram per kilogram or about 70 kilograms is a person, right? So, and then that's 150 pounds. And then you have about 70 milligrams or so, 50 to 70 milligrams. That's when it becomes, methylene blue starts becoming antimicrobial overall. And so there are people that need those kinds of doses. We've used those doses, especially for acute infection and also chronic infections as well. So there's some good data on acute viral infections as well using methylene blue at these doses. And so, but in general, like lower doses, 4, 8, 16, 25 or more mitochondrial optimization, and then up around a milligram per kilogram. So 50, 70 milligrams of methylene blue and above tend to be more antimicrobial. And so there are some people that I work with that are on higher doses of methylene blue over a longer period of time because they have chronic infection, and we're addressing that. I have a couple of colleagues of mine that work with a lot of Lyme patients and Bartonella patients. And they use 100 milligrams of methylene blue twice daily in some of these patients over periods of time. But if you're going to be on these higher doses, you need to be monitored closely because there are some additional risks of being on higher doses of methylene blue over periods of time. We can talk about that. But the lower doses are very, very safe. The higher doses, over about 50 milligrams a day, I usually recommend following pretty closely with a practitioner overall.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I was hoping we could get into some of the contraindications. I know when you get a package of the troches, and these are things that dissolve in the mouth for people that didn't go to pharmacy school. They basically dissolve in the mouth, but you can also swallow them if you want to show off that blue mouth, right? Because if you dissolve them in the mouth, they will definitely stain your mouth blue. I do have a hack for that. Uh, you have a way to you have a little scanner where people can scan, and it asks them if they have any of these reasons why they shouldn't be taking it. Can we go through some of the reasons why a person may not want to take methylene blue?
Yeah, yeah, sure. Um, so methylene blue, there's a couple different things. So number one, if you're pregnant or you're breastfeeding, you're not supposed to take methylene blue. There's some contraindication there. There's some been studies that show that maybe something that could be detrimental to the baby. So I would not recommend it if you're pregnant or breastfeeding. Um,
Can't do anything when you're pregnant or breastfeeding.
I know you can. It's one of those things they don't ever study women. Number one or number two, definitely not pregnant women. So it's a difficult thing to find safe things. I know when you're pregnant. Um, that's number one. Or number one, number two is pregnant and breastfeeding. The second or the next one would be because methylene blue works as a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, so it increases serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. If you're taking drugs like SSRIs or SNRIs, like serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, then it may not be a good idea to start methylene blue without, at least you shouldn't do it without significant practitioner supervision overall. The risk of something called serotonin syndrome is extremely, extremely low. Serotonin syndrome it happens when there's too much serotonin around. This has only been described with IV methylene blue in the past and very high dose of SSRIs. But in general, it shouldn't happen. But people can feel kind of strange if they have more serotonin around than they're not used to. especially if they're already on an SSRI. I do have there's integrative psychiatrists that are weaning patients off the SSRIs of the world and using methylene blue instead, but they're doing it very carefully, very slowly over time. So if you're taking those medications, I just be mindful of taking methylene blue without practitioner supervision, especially high doses. And then there's also because their norepinephrine does get released there, some people will get an increase in blood pressure. It's not commonly an issue if you don't have hypertension, but if you do have high blood pressure, it can increase your blood pressure. So it's something you have to watch carefully if you're starting methylene blue, that your blood pressure doesn't increase as a result of taking it. There's also detox symptoms. You love that like sort of quoted detox symptoms, I'm sure, Isabella, because what does that mean? Like when you're starting to rev up metabolism and increase energy production, detoxification is what methylene blue does. You may see detox kinds of symptoms. So you can see some mild headaches, you can have GI distress, you can have irritability, some sleeping issues when you first start it. It's always good to start using methylene blue in the mornings and not use it in the afternoons or evenings until you get used to it or kind of see how it's going to make you feel. But in essence, these detox symptoms can happen and just be aware of. But the key that I found over the years to be most successful here is that you work on the dosing slowly. Unless it's an acute issue like acute trauma, acute low oxygen state, like all of my patients have a higher dose methylene blue in their medicine cabinet just in case they have something more acute. So I can give them a milligram to 2 milligrams per kilogram of methylene blue. So I can give them 70 to 150 milligrams of methylene blue, depending on the situation. But that's acutely. In general, we want to start off at lower doses and then titrate their dose over time to see what works best. So, like lowest effective dose, right? That kind of thing. So, starting off at 4 milligrams, increasing to 6 or 8 every 3 to 5 days, increasing every 4 milligrams every 3 to 5 days is what I typically recommend until you find the dose that works for you. So by doing that, you mitigate any potential or the significant potential of having detox kinds of symptoms. Um, Higher doses of methylene blue, like over a milligram per kilogram, so 70 milligrams of methylene blue or more, that's when you're starting to think of, well, should I be looking at a couple other things? Like one of them would be something called G6PD deficiency. G6PD deficiency is a hereditary congenital issue with your red blood cells, where you have a higher risk of the red blood cells being susceptible to oxidative stress, susceptible to stress in general, and they can break and lyse and cause issues. I haven't honestly seen. There's no research that shows that oral doses of methylene blue are going to cause this, except for there's only one study that I saw on IV methylene blue causing it at high doses, causing it like a hemolytic anemia and G6PD. So that's basically when your red blood cells start breaking. But in essence, if you're going to be taking high doses, especially for a long period of time, I do recommend getting a G6PD test just to make sure. But in essence, I think the risk is pretty low there too. But the other no risk to have is having a blue brain. We can talk.
um, yeah, I was trying to think about G6PD deficiency. I remember learning about this. This is pretty rare, isn't it?
It's not that rare. It's in Mediterranean populations overall. It's not. I think it's not as. I think sickle cell anemia is more common, but it's as as a genetic disorder, it's one of the more common ones overall. But it's still very relatively uncommon. And again, I think if you're taking lower doses, it's not an issue. If you're taking anything above a milligram per kilogram, especially for long periods of time, I do think you should get it checked just to be sure. The other potential of these higher doses, there's been some reports of gastric ulceration, so getting ulcers in the stomach if you're taking higher doses for long periods of time. I've also, at least anecdotally, because methylene blue is an antimicrobial, I've seen gut diversity go down in people that have been taking it for long periods of time at higher doses. At lower doses, I haven't seen it. In fact, it's actually been beneficial at lower doses for the gut microbiota, interestingly enough. I think that's because it's helping the mitochondria overall and helping cellular metabolism overall as well. But so just something to be aware of. If you're taking the higher doses, it might shrink your gut microbiota diversity over time too.
That makes sense. And what I wanted to say about G6PD is the fava bean connection, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
this is something that you would need to avoid fava beans. I feel like I don't know that's like a very very interesting condition that isn't as common. What I think I've seen out there though is like clickbait lately about people using methylene blue and their brain turning blue. Is that something like people need to worry about if they're taking maybe like a troche here and there? like that their brain is going to be permanently blue?
So yeah, this is some great clickbait that just came out pretty recently. And so methylene blue works as a cellular stain. So what it does is it concentrates in the mitochondria, and this is how they figured out, well, something's happening with this methylene blue in the mitochondria. What's going on there? And that's when they started investigating. Oh, there's amazing, all these amazing things that we talked about. It can compensate for mitochondrial dysfunction. It can optimize electron transport. It can help with detox. All of these things because it's used as a cellular stain, and that's how they figured it out. So what this one paper was showing that was then transposed into an article that was complete bullshit is that methylene was causing people's brains to turn blue on autopsy. And so what they saw on this particular review on this study is when people were in severe septic shock or they had cardiopulmonary arrest, they were giving huge amounts of IV methylene blue repeatedly as a last ditch effort to get these people to survive. And it was basically this, it wasn't even just methylene blue that they were using in this report. They was also using something called toluene blue, which is not methylene blue. It's something else as well. It's even more toxic. It's a very toxic ingredient overall. The thing about methylene blue is that at very, very, very high doses, like over about 3 milligrams per kilogram, especially IV, then you're getting you're not getting this redox capacity. You're not getting this electron flow detoxification. You're getting a pure stress to the system, an oxidative stress to the system. And they use it in what's called vasoplesic shock. They use it in shock where your blood vessels can't, they're so dilated that your blood pressure is down to next to nothing. And so what methylene blue can do is it can cause a vasoconstriction by causing a significant amount of stress on the system as a last ditch effort. So what they do? They did autopsies on these people immediately after giving them huge amounts of IV methylene blue, and they saw that their brains were blue. This is not surprising because they were giving such huge amounts of methylene blue. Nobody that's listening to this will ever be taking anything remotely close to this. I promise you. And low doses like the we're talking about have no indication. We have no indication at all that your brain is turning blue. Will there be a blue pigment in your mitochondria for a period of time? The answer is probably yes. And that's okay. That's the idea. That's what we want. The other thing is that when methylene blue converts itself to its reduced form. So there's different forms of methylene blue. It turns from blue to colorless as well. So it doesn't stay blue. It changes its conformation depending on what it needs to do. So nobody needs to worry about having a blue brain like they see on these pictures. It's just fantastic viral clickbait that, hey, we're talking about it. So he did a good job making an article. But I don't worry about this in low doses for my patients over long periods of time. I've had many people on low doses of methylene blue for a long period of time, and they do very well overall. And nothing to worry about. This is a very, very extreme situation where people were very, very sick and had autopsies directly after dying, after getting huge amounts of IV methylene blue.
I mean, it's kind of to me, it's like pharmacology 101. If you're going to have a really high dose of something, you're going to have different effects than you're using a low dose, right? I talk about low dose naltrexone, and it has certain benefits when you use tiny doses of that. Thyroid medications, like we need to have the dosages just right. When we overdose on thyroid medications, that can be life threatening. And when we're looking at even nutrients like selenium. I love some selenium for thyroid health, but if you go above, let's say 200 micrograms is the therapeutic dose, if you were to multiply that by 10, you'd be at a toxic dose. And it's like whether something is a remedy or a poison, this is largely dependent on that dose. And so of course they're going to see different effects when they're giving something IV at super super high doses in this emergency situation, which potentially could have caused some toxicity, but perhaps saved the person's life, and in conjunction with the toluene blue. Um, and then there's like the half life, right? And so if you give a really high dose and you're doing the autopsy right after that, then you're going to see that blue stain. So if I'm taking a methylene blue troche and I look in the mirror right after, my teeth are going to be bright blue, but they're not going to stay blue for the rest of my life. Like I've tested this, right? I don't have.
Yeah, you make an interesting point about half-life too, which I forgot to mention, is that interestingly enough, the half-life of IV methylene blue is 24 hours, but the half-life of oral methylene blue is 4 to 6 hours. So for whatever reason, IV methylene blue stays in the system for much longer. as well compared to the oral version. And so that's another reason why this may have been the case where they did these autopsies and saw this. And one of the major actually issues that I have with a lot of the products on the market, Isabel, is that I do think they're too high of a dose for most people. Most of the products out there are talking about doing about a milligram per kilogram, talking about 40, 50, 70 milligrams of methylene blue a day. And I don't think that's going to turn your brain blue either, by the way. I think it's going to be fine. But I don't think that those doses are necessary for most people. I do think that the lower doses, we've seen this clinically for the last 5 years. We've seen it story after story, and also research on the neurocognitive side of things, and things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and depression and bipolar. Like the doses that were studied in these were 16 milligrams, 12 milligrams of methylene blue. So I think most people that are getting products from other companies are likely taking too much over time. And then I also think, and I worry a couple of things. I worry that the liquid methylene blues that are out there, the potency never meets the label claim. We've actually tested this. So oftentimes it's about 60 to 80% of what it says on the label. And then even one we tested was like 125% of the label itself, which so none of them met label claim. And the other thing about methylene blue you have to be careful of is that it is a synthetic ingredient, and so on the production process, it can be contaminated with heavy metals, things like lead, mercury, arsenic, and cadmium. And so you don't want those, obviously. And that also could be causing toxicity to the system over time, especially at high doses. If you're taking really low doses, like we are, like it's not as a big a deal. But if you're taking 50, 100 milligrams of methylene blue and you have trace heavy metals, those are going to build up over time. And that is very concerning to me. So like as a clinician, and as a company, we've had to throw out thousands of dollars worth of product over the years because we don't want it to have, we want it to meet our label claims. We want to make sure the purity and potency is as close as we can to being as perfect as we can every single time. And so it's a big issue with methylene blue. I think, the doses are too high for most people to be taking, I think. And also the purity and potency, even if it has something called the USP label, which is supposed to be a pharmaceutical grade label. We've tested those too, and it doesn't always meet that standard overall.
And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to try prescriptions, is because I know that you have it was created by integrative physicians versus, some guy in some weird country that's a little bit sketchy. Whenever there's like new things on the market, I'm always like, okay, let's make sure the source of it I can trust, because otherwise you don't know what you're getting. And so thank you for creating this, and making such a good point with looking into, like, is this a clean source, right? And what is the optimal dosing? And I know you guys, and I say that in the kindest way, you guys are such nerds.
I know. Yeah, we are. Yeah.
Appreciate that about you guys. Like, I really, really appreciate it, because you do your due diligence. And if something, were turning everybody's brains blue, you definitely would not be advocating for it.
No, no, and I don't recommend those. I mean, again, if I was in severe septic shock and I needed IV methylene blue, then go for it, But overall, like, and that I would give it to a family member in that case too. But in general, that's be very, very rare, that need to happen. So
Okay, so how I use it, my little life hack is I use, if I'll swallow it, or if I take it orally, like as a troche, but which basically dissolves in your cheeks. It's kind of a fun way of doing it, is I will drink some matcha tea right after, like green tea, and I find that basically clears it away from my teeth. It also helps to boost the focus. And then I'll usually do like a red light therapy session. So that's sort of my protocol that I like to utilize with it. Could you share how I accidentally discovered something cool without really knowing?
your matcha is still unclear to me as to why it works as well as it does for you, to be honest. But that's one I recommend for almost everybody these days because of you. So thank you for that, Isabel. Um, Hot liquids in general tend to help get rid of the blue a little bit faster. Let the blue. The way we designed it, it's called the buccal troche. It goes between your upper cheek and gum, and of course, because methylene blue is such a significant dye-colored blue, you're going to get teeth and tongue that look blue. So many people just swallow it, as you mentioned, as a result of that. If you swallow it, it's best to do on an empty stomach in general, because that's going to be the fastest absorbed overall. The other piece, if you do dissolve the mouth, is that the more you take, the more your mouth is going to be blue, of course. And so the best thing is just park it there and don't move it. Don't talk while it's in your mouth. And then as soon as it's fully dissolved, you can use hot liquids. We also found baking soda can be helpful here. Vitamin C hypothetically would be helpful, you think, because you did it outside the body. It's something called the blue bottle experiment, where you can actually take methylene blue and then you add vitamin C to it, and it turns from blue to colorless. This is because you're changing the redox state of methylene blue, because vitamin C is doing that. It doesn't work in the mouth, but if you get methylene blue on like a countertop or in your sink, I've basically almost been divorced twice because of this, I think. So I have buffered vitamin C at my house and I have a scrubbing brush. And so buffered vitamin C will get it out of countertops, it'll get out of sinks, it'll get out of washing machines. I have experience here overall. But so those are the major things that we typically use, is your baking soda, your matcha, which is good, hot liquids, and of course, brushing your teeth can be helpful there too. So
I love it. I'll have to keep that in mind. I decided like I wanted to buy this white marble table and it's like been like the worst decision. It's beautiful, but like anything that I put on it, it just like absorbs immediately. So I'll have to get some buffered vitamin C in case I get any methylene blue coloring. And then utilizing red light therapy along with it can be another way to support the mitochondria.
for sure, yeah, there's definitely some synergy there. There was a good paper done, showing the synergy between the two. A guy named Francisco Gonzalez Lima, who's done a lot of great research on methylene blue as well. And it's because they donate electrons to the same part of the mitochondria to help you make energy. So you'll find that if you take some methylene blue, go out in the sunlight, or get you good in front of your red light panel, you'll feel a boost overall. You'll feel more energy. You'll feel stronger. You'll feel more endurance. It's a good combination. Use it a lot.
A lot of studies about red light therapy or low level laser therapy with hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's and how that can help and just overall with mitochondria. So it's interesting, like we have another tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
We talked about focus, and I feel like a lot of times people, when they have those focus issues, attention issues, even brain fatigue, even some of the mild, I would say, depression, and they're not on medications, methylene blue can really be supportive for their mood, for their energy, for their focus. Another big thing that people with thyroid issues struggle with, especially with Hashimoto's and oftentimes with Graves' disease, is going to be anxiety, right? I would say Trudy Scott is a nutritionist, one of my colleagues, and she primarily worked with a population of anxiety. And she said, like, more than half of them had Hashimoto's. To me, that's like a really big red flag. And oftentimes, anxiety is one of the first symptoms that people with Hashimoto's will report. Generally speaking, they get sent off to a psychiatrist and whatnot and put on SSRIs. Um, there are, and of course, medications like Ativan and Xanax, I know I was first on my healing journey and I would be like, why am I having panic attacks? Why am I so anxious all the time? Like, this is not my personality. I used to just be very even keel. And I was given, some kind of an SSRI and Ativan. And we don't necessarily want to take Ativan on a long term basis because it can be addictive. Um, but it can be actually helpful because of the pathways that it supports. Can we get into like GABA a bit and the next GABA and anxiety?
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate you mentioning it. I think, when it comes to kind of bring it full circle with the mitochondria, right? We know that if your mitochondria are a lot more stress, anxiety, this is also going to really affect how well you can make energy as well. You need to be able to calm down our nervous system to be able to detox, to rest, to digest. And many of us are just on all the time, and we don't know how to turn off. And this, it can maybe it's probably oftentimes not our fault. Like we become deficient in a neurotransmitter called GABA. GABA is our primary neurotransmitter that's responsible for relaxing, for calming down the brain, for making us feel like we can slow down. And the problem with many of us now is that we're GABA deficient. And if you're GABA deficient, you have a higher risk of anxiety, depression, insomnia, mood disorders in general. And we know, as you were just mentioning, Isabella, about going on SSRIs, we know that depression is not a serotonin deficiency. Like, there's some good meta-analysis that happened over the last couple of years that show that people with depression do not have lower serotonin levels than people that don't have depression. So it's not a serotonin disorder or a deficiency. This is what we used to think back in the 90s and early 2000s. And so we do know that the GABA system is much more involved oftentimes in depression, anxiety, insomnia than in the serotonin system overall. And so there was actually a recent drug that was just approved over the last year for postpartum depression. It's a GABA A agonist. So it works on the GABA system. It's the first drug for postpartum depression, and it works immediately because it's working on the GABA system. So when your GABA is low, your brain is going to be on overload. In general, on average, a human has about 70,000 thoughts per day. Okay. That's a lot of thoughts overall. But if you're anxious or you're depressed, even, those amount go up to about 120,000 thoughts per day. And so the GABA system is so involved in various areas in the brain that they're kind of like waylay stations. They're called interneurons. And so they gate a lot of the information. They filter a lot of the information so that we don't get overloaded. And so when we're low on GABA, we don't have that filter system involved as much, and we don't have that off switch as a result of it to decrease, to tamp down or damper down all those that are happening so quickly oftentimes. And so, why are people GABA deficient? They're deficient on it because of stress overall. So stress, having elevated cortisol levels for long periods of time, is going to deplete your GABA over time. Vitamin mineral deficiencies, you need B6 and magnesium to convert into GABA. So GABA really is only made in the brain. You can't take GABA supplements, and they shouldn't work. If you take GABA as a supplement and it works for you, it could be because you have a leaky brain. Your brain's not doing an efficient job protecting itself. That blood-brain barrier is supposed to prevent things getting in there that shouldn't get in there. GABA is too big of a molecule to get across, except if you maybe have like a nanoliposomal version of it or very, very high amounts of GABA in supplementation. Maybe you'll get some in there if it's very high, but in general, it's too big of a molecule. GABA gets converted into GABA by something called glutamate. So glutamate is our primary excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain, and then it gets converted from glutamate to GABA in the brain. And you need vitamin B6 and magnesium to do that. So glutamate itself is an amino acid. You also have glutamine, which is the amino acid precursor of both of glutamate. Or you can take glutamate directly, but most of the time you're getting glutamine in the system. You don't really want to have glutamate directly if you can avoid it. This is the MSG syndrome, as we know. As we go to a Chinese restaurant, you have MSG, you get a whole bunch of glutamate very quickly. You do not feel well. You have headaches. You feel irritable. You can't sleep. This is glutamate toxicity, basically. And the idea is that we're supposed to be able to convert that glutamate into GABA. We need B6 and magnesium to do that. And so you can have vitamin, mineral, nutrient deficiencies that are causing issues with your GABA. You can have gut issues if you have leaky gut. Your primary fuel for your small intestine is actually glutamine. And so if you're eating up all that glutamine to try to heal your gut, you're not going to get enough, get enough glutamate to the brain to get converted to GABA overall. And so that's also going to make you GABA deficient over time as well. So this neurotransmitter is so important, is what it comes down to, for regulating your mood, your anxiety, your stress, and your sleep. And many of us are just walking around not knowing that we're deficient in it.
Some things I've seen really, really interesting with regard to GABA. We know that progesterone can stimulate GABA receptors as well. And a lot of times, women in perimenopause and menopause, I have a lot of girlfriends, and some of them are like, they're all trying to support, their their system. And I have friends that would be like taking CBD, or they would be drinking wine to try to chill themselves out. And what they are actually missing could be GABA, right?
Yeah, I mean, we know that when you go through menopause, your progesterone levels drop dramatically. And then that's one of the major reasons why women going through menopause or perimenopause can have significant sleep issues overall. So, certainly supporting the GABA system is very, very helpful in this case. And there's lots of different ways to do this. Optimizing your vitamins, minerals, your guts is very, very important for sure. That's important. But you can use supplementation to help too. It's just important. You talked about benzos, for example, like benzodiazepines and alcohol bind very tightly to the GABA receptor, and they give you a higher risk of having tolerance over time. So you need more dependence. So you need it all the time, and withdrawal if you stop them as well. And so trying to avoid things like benzos and alcohol is a really good idea overall. And trying to use natural things to enhance the GABA system are really helpful. I think the major thing to think about here is that um, supporting the GABA system, again, taking GABA supplements doesn't typically work for most people. If it does, you should probably get checked out by your practitioner, see if you have a leaky gut overall. Oftentimes, these supplementations, like supplements that have GABA in them, have other things in them, like L-theanine, for example, ashwagandha, lemon balm, the kava. These are all working on the GABA receptor. So if you're taking like a combination of things like this, it's GABA's not doing the trick for you. It's probably the other stuff overall. So the way we think about formulating transcriptions is a combination of things that are supporting the GABA system, the GABA receptor, but not using GABA directly. So we use something called nicotinyl GABA, a vitamin B3 attached to a GABA, and that B3 does have a transporter that it gets crossed, no problem. And then so the GABA gets in the brain that way with a little bit of B3. And then you have kava, which binds to a separate site on the GABA receptor, increasing the affinity for GABA to bind. So that combination is really cool. And then you have CBD and CBG, which are cannabinoids, but they also bind to the GABA receptor along with binding to the endocannabinoid receptors in the brain as well. So it's a really nice combination, supporting the brain, decreasing anxiety and stress, but it doesn't make you feel tired, which is pretty cool because the vitamin B3 that's attached to that GABA, B3 is mildly activating. So instead of feeling like, dead to the world, taking your Xanax or your benzo or, your alcohol, if you take a lot of it, you can take this combination, you feel more relaxed. Your nervous system is going to calm down. You're going to start healing better. You're going to start detoxing better. You're going to start sleeping better. And you're not going to feel tired in the process, which is pretty nice. And we have another one. We have another combination that's in a sleep product as well that combines a number of GABA things together that are also working on the receptor in various ways. Another cool ingredient called agarine, which is from a psychedelic mushroom called the Amanita muscaria mushroom or the fly agaric mushroom. This is a mushroom that is famous for Christmas lore. It's got the big red top, red cap with the white spots on it. Santa Claus mushroom. Sometimes people call it Alice in Wonderland, Mario Brothers. But it's a psychedelic mushroom because it has another ingredient there called ibotenic acid, which is psychedelic because it's neurotoxic. But the other ingredient called agarine is a long-acting molecule that works on the GABA receptor. And so we use that in the product too, which is pretty cool. And it works really well. Not psychedelic at low doses.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I know you're in Colorado, but
Yeah, yeah. Not psychedelic, low doses, very safe. And it's nice because it's long acting because it works on the GABA receptor, so it helps you sleep, throughout the night.
so you're not gonna, like, hallucinate, you're not gonna be, like, flying flying around in your pajamas or anything like that, that it just, the extracts of it are the relax is what's gonna stimulate and help you relax. Yeah, I've had mixed results with GABA, and I know a lot of people with Hashimoto's might have intestinal permeability that's more common in autoimmunity in general. But there have been people that said they would take GABA as a supplement and it worked well. And then other people were like, I'm taking it and I'm just hoping to be less anxious, but it's really not working. So I love that this formulation kind of bypasses the system, right?
Yeah, I mean, we do know that there are microbiota in our gut that do make GABA as well, but that's lactobacillus and bifidobacterium mostly actually. But that GABA doesn't get into the brain. That GABA only does signaling through the vagus nerve to the brain to cause you to release and make more GABA. So it's kind of like an indirect way of like upstream or downstream modulation, depending how you look at it. So, but in essence, clinically, and I've talked to a number of practitioners, if GABA supplements work for you, it really does make sense to address potentially a leaky gut and a leaky brain. And this is so common, actually. People think this is not something that exists. I've gotten a lot of flack for this for some reason, like leaky brains don't exist. I'm like, look up the data. There's tons of it, right? And especially if you get an acute infection, acute stress, acute trauma, like the blood-brain barrier, your gut get leaky because of the stress and the inflammation. This happened a ton in COVID as well. We saw this people with reactivations of things like Lyme and mold and viral infections post COVID because of having this, the depressed immune system, and then all of a sudden they get this like leaky brain, leaky gut situation, and they can't, they can't recover very easily as a result of that. So, and it's a process to recover from that.
That's interesting. And what about kava? Can you talk a little bit more about that? I feel like um, that has gotten some negative press as well. Or is there something to keep in mind about that?
Yeah, the negative press with kava was over a decade ago, and it was related to eating the wrong part of the plant and causing liver failure. And there was like one study or one case report about it. The plant that the part of the plant that you're supposed to have doesn't cause any issues at all, and that's in most of the supplements that are out there. And kava itself is a native plant to the Pacific. The South Pacific, and it's been used for thousands of years in ceremony as a way to commune with people, to have conversations, to drop in and relax as a drink. Kava works on a separate site of the GABA receptor, enhancing the amount of GABA to bind to the receptor itself. But kava at high doses can deplete GABA as well over time. And so it's something that you can develop a tolerance and things like that too. It can feel like alcohol if you have a lot of it. And so that's why the way we formulated it was having low doses of everything and then supporting the GABA system by not only giving something that enhances GABA's affinity to bind to its receptor, but also something that binds the receptor directly that looks and smells and works just like GABA. I don't know if it smells like GABA, but it looks and works just like GABA. So, but that's the idea. So you don't deplete GABA over time with the formulations that we have, is what it comes down to. But yeah, so really no risks. Kava is very, very safe. Of course, whatever you're buying out there, make sure that it's well tested and that you know where it's coming from. I can't vouch for every product out there, of course, but we do a lot of testing on what we get to make sure it's clean and we know exactly what's in our products overall.
I think, and I mean, that's the difference with like practitioner brands and professional brands, nutraceutical brands versus like Walmart brands. And I know when I was in pharmacy school, I was like very apprehensive about utilizing supplements because I thought they all had like, toxins in them or didn't have what the labels said that they had. But there's a whole, different way. There's a way of actually manufacturing supplements where you look at quality and you can do quality control. And again, it's not the same as the stuff you would find like at some cheap place like Walmart where you don't really know what you're getting there, right? And there's potential for counterfeit and um, the label claims aren't going to match, and so they can have completely different contents within them. Um, One of the things I've also noticed with people with GABA, L-glutamine, even with glycine, when they tend to be low in B6, they can actually over convert to glutamate, which is the excitatory neurotransmitter. And so I'll be like, I'm going to take magnesium glycinate to help me sleep. And they're like having anxiety and insomnia. Would the way that you guys formulated that, would that bypass that system or what are your thoughts?
It's a good question. I mean, it should potentially do it. I think you can have this sort of reverse. I forget. There's actually a word for it in pharmacology that you might remember more than me. But there's a reverse. What's that?
Paradoxical effect?
Yeah, it's that, but there's a different word, but like you can have a reverse effect, like a reverse synthesis effect, depending on like it's like in certain ecosystems and situations. And I've seen this a little bit over time, but the way at least we've done it with our products is that we've tried to formulate in a comprehensive way, so that you're not just getting something that binds the receptor and is trying to grab more GABA from your system that's already there to bind to help it work. No, we're giving you something that's binding the receptor then and also giving you something that's binding the GABA site at the same time. So we're trying to prevent any issues with your actually if you have deficiency or not, because we're giving you something that's building on the system itself rather than you having to take your own. So the idea would be we wouldn't be trying to take from depleted stores in this case. We'd be giving you what you need so that you could comprehensively support the GABA receptor, and as a result of that, get the GABA signaling as a result. Yeah.
That makes sense. Just in my understanding of how it would work, it seems like it would bypass that system. So even if GABA didn't work for somebody, this might be something that might work for them,
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
even if it felt, worse with something like glycine that's normally supposed to be calming.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I feel like this is something that a lot of people struggle with. And it's not just like brain anxiety, your body can actually feel very tense. You can carry a lot of tension in your body when you have GABA depletion.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's something that people just aren't looking for as clinicians. We're not thinking about GABA deficiency. We're thinking about, serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, like our superstar neurotransmitters, which everybody thinks are, and they're important, but 80% of your brain's neurotransmission is combined with glutamate and GABA. 20% is everything else. And so not addressing these things is kind of the elephant in the room. And so just with depression, using SSRIs or something like that, you're missing the boat oftentimes, right? And so like, can these things be helpful? For sure. And some people it can be life changing and life saving. And I totally acknowledge that, but I don't think it's getting to sort of, the real issue oftentimes, which is something underlying that's happening that needs to be addressed. And the GABA system is often a culprit, is what it's seeming like.
Yeah, I feel like GABA is really underappreciated for sure.
We're bringing it back. We're bringing it to the fore.
So we talked about a bit about energy, focus, brain health, and about GABA and anxiety. I know one of the things that happened to me recently is I hit my head like trying to open up my trunk of my car, and I just like really banged my head after that, and I was like, oh man, I think I had a concussion and I wasn't quite all there. I did take some methylene blue. I felt that helped a lot. One of my friends was really advocating for hyperbaric oxygen therapy for me for that. What do you think with hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and how does that fit into supporting brain function? What are the best times to use it? Some pros of utilizing it, and perhaps when it might like not be the right time to use it for people. Because I know we hear about this amazing therapy, but to me, it's kind of like that's a really big commitment, right?
It can be, yeah. I mean, I think the quick and easy for hyperbaric therapy is that we're getting a lot more oxygen in circulation. The more pressure, atmospheric pressure that we use in a chamber to simulate the pressure you feel under a certain amount of seawater, the more oxygen that gets in circulation. And so the thing about hyperbaric therapy is that we're really doing just three things: we're increasing the amount of oxygen in circulation, we're causing some stress on the system with the oxygen that's created in the system as well, and we have pressure in the system too. So hyperbaric therapy is just oxygen and pressure combined. And so I use it a lot for many different things over the years, I think. But the main thing I alluded to in the beginning is that if you're flooding the system with oxygen, you have to be able to use that oxygen effectively to make energy and to do the work that you want it to do. So, because when you make energy, you also make reactive oxygen species, and your body has to be able to respond to that by having antioxidants in the system. And so, hyperbaric therapy shines for acute trauma, acute stress, acute injury, like a concussion, for example, because all you really need to do in those cases is get more oxygen in circulation. If you can get more oxygen in circulation very quickly, you can reverse things like low oxygen states. So there's studies in stroke and traumatic brain injury and heart attack and spinal cord injury and others where you can reverse the low oxygen state, you can save tissue, and you can save brain, heart, etc., limbs, those kinds of things. Also, these high amounts of oxygen in the short term can be really great for infections that do not like high oxygen environments. And that's how I learned about hyperbaric therapy in the beginning was through things like flesh-eating bacteria, which is a nasty necrotizing infection that kills a lot of skin and other things along the way. And so hyperbaric therapy can be really effective in those cases. Um, in the long term, what hyperbaric therapy does doesn't not only does it reverse low oxygen states, it creates new blood vessels and tissue to help sustain tissue over the long term. It releases stem cells from the body. Then these stem cells are our baby cells that can go to different areas in the body to help us heal. It improves our immune system function. It helps with healing. It fights infection, improves the lymphatic flow, and it decreases inflammation. It actually has a capacity to downregulate a whole bunch of pathways like interleukin pathways and TNF cytokine pathways and things like that. And it does that through all those things. It does through epigenetic modifications. It does it through changing how our DNA is being expressed. And that's all through oxygen signaling is what it comes down to. So short term, you don't have to, if you have an acute issue, you don't need that much hyperbaric therapy to see a major benefit. 3, 5 sessions can go a long way, 10 sessions. Like surgeries, trauma, like a concussion, for example. If you have a more long-term issue, a long-term goal, then more hyperbaric therapy is going to be necessary to change your physiology, your epigenetics and expression of DNA and do all the things that I just mentioned. But the key to be able to do all that is that you have to have the machinery in your cellular system to be able to sustain that. So can you make energy effectively? Do you have the machinery to be able to do that? Do you have the energy or do you have the machinery effective to help detox from the energy that you make? Otherwise, if you don't, you're not going to feel very good going to a chamber. And you'll see this in people that are super sick that go into a chamber too soon and they feel terrible. And that sometimes they'll feel a little bit better after a little while, but almost always, if you're feeling terrible when you go into a chamber, even if you start feeling better at the end of the whole process, which can happen, more than likely you're going to rebound and you go back to the way you felt before because you weren't really addressing some of the cellular issues that were underlying or at least involved in how you were feeling. So my framework is if there's an acute issue, do not pass go. Hyperbaric therapy is fantastic. And just like Monopoly, everybody, okay? Do not, it's really something like go to the hospital if you need to, obviously, if you're really sick or something. But hyperbaric therapy can be fantastic for healing. If it is a more long term goal or an issue of like a long term, like chronic issue, then getting your optimization strategies in order first are almost always a better idea. And then from there, thinking about using hyperbaric therapy directed at your indication. There's different pressures that we use in the chamber. Sometimes we use milder pressures for more neurocognitive things and sort of optimization, and deeper pressures for more systemic things and more stem cell release and more more overall deeper more systemic things in general. So that's kind of a quick overview, I think. So
That's really great. I know I did a literature review many years ago about hyperbaric oxygen therapy for thyroid health, and I came across. I'm from Poland, so I came across some Russian studies that help with hypothyroidism and autoimmune markers. So I'm curious if you've seen that in your patient population.
So what I've seen is that you can use hyperbaric therapy for autoimmune conditions, but it's not going to reverse the autoimmune condition. It can help mitigate some of the markers, it can help decrease inflammation, but if you stop hyperbaric therapy, it's going to go back up. So in those cases, what I've done is use maintenance hyperbaric therapy. So use it longer term for people to help sustain some of that benefit. But again, it's oftentimes like, well, why do we have autoimmunity in the first place? And if you can address some of the autoimmune issues or the reasons behind it, like you have over the years with yourself and people and clients, using hyperbaric therapy can be a fantastic tool in that process for sure. But if somebody comes to me and says, I have Hashimoto's, for example, and like I want to use hyperbaric therapy. I'm like, well, what else are you doing for your Hashimoto's? So like, I'm not going to say like, okay, here's hyperbaric, here's your protocol at 30, 40 sessions. See you in 2 months, and we'll see how you do. Because it just doesn't work that way. I've seen benefit for sure, but then that benefit wanes over time, and then the symptoms come back. And so if you're not also doing, the other things, and this also gets me in trouble in hyperbaric circles because I tell people not to go into the chamber and like wait and do things before then. But this is what I do clinically, and this is what I've seen to be the most benefit overall.
Thank you so much for sharing that because I feel like people have limited time and resources, and this can be an incredibly helpful tool. But don't put your eggs all in one basket, right? Definitely, I would say it can be very, very helpful, but don't like avoid all of like, do take your thyroid meds, like if you need that, and do utilize nutrients and nutrition and looking for root causes versus like being like, okay, let's just focus on this thing, this one thing, and expect it to do everything for us, right?
Yeah, I mean, what I have done in some cases is that I use very like milder pressures, like a soft chamber or something, just to help people feel a little bit better. Because it's not too much stress in the system to have a mild chamber. And then from there, once they start feeling a little bit better, then like having them do all the other stuff, the other work on the diet, the lifestyle, the behavior, those kinds of things, and then thinking about a deeper pressure chamber, going forward. Like the milder pressures, like 1.3 atmospheres, 1.5, which is the equivalent of about 15 to 20 feet of seawater. Like that's relatively mild. Most people aren't going to have a negative effect to that, but they may not have like a long-term benefit to that, but they can get some short-term benefit that may give them enough energy, like enough ability to feel better enough to do some of the things that were harder for them to do initially. So I have used it in that way, but it's a cost, as you said, and going to a facility, buying a chamber, like it's doable. You can do it, but it's not a small amount of money. So I'm always trying, like as you are, like what's the low hanging fruit, and like honestly, like a low hanging fruit for me is methylene blue, like because it's not that expensive. You can take it orally. You can titrate your dose over time, and it's optimizing mitochondrial function. And then once people start feeling better using that, then I can have them do some of the harder things that they would do, and then I can optimize their GABA system. And then so like it's become for me, what I typically do is that I like to optimize using my clinical framework, using health optimization medicine, optimizing vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and cofactors. But while I'm doing that, I'm optimizing their GABA system, optimizing their mitochondria using, methylene blue and using some of the GABAergic things. And then once I do all that, then it's like, okay, now it's time for hyperbaric therapy. So if you still need it, and then I think there's a role for hyperbaric therapy over the long term for people from a like anti-aging perspective or longevity, all those things. But I don't think out of that doesn't really matter to me to get them if they don't do the other stuff ahead of time. So it's not like, and I get these questions all the time. It's like, oh, I'm going to go do hyperbaric therapy for longevity. I'm like, yes, but what else are you doing for longevity? Like, are you optimizing your diet, your lifestyle, like your behavior, your stress? Like, if you're not doing any of this stuff, I don't give a shit how much hyperbaric therapy you do. It's not going to work over the long term. So I think that's my order of operations these days, right? And I think we kind of went through that in the podcast this way, which is clinical framework, methylene blue, parasympathetic activation with the GABA system, and then using things like hyperbaric therapy to accelerate to really take things to the next level. But in that order, I think is important for that's how I practice these days. So
I love that. Yeah, I think it makes sense to take care of the low hanging fruit. And when you give people their energy back, then they can start like making food. And I know I've been on my own healing journey, and sometimes you're in this like overwhelm and you just can't focus. And you might have a lab test kit sitting on your desk for 6 before you do it. And my record was a client that I think sent in a kit after 7 years. Like I wasn't even using that like portal anymore. I've transitioned most of my things to Roomba, and I was like, what is this?" And I was like, "Client from 7 years ago that turned in a GI map, right?" that was finally got around to doing it. But when you can take something that helps you focus and prioritize, then you can really have bigger strides in your healing journey.
That's I'm all about it. That's really what it comes down to. I used to, dive into the supplements and to the I think things very quickly with people, but it's really important to focus on the basics, right? It's like and focus on things that aren't going to cost a huge amount of money that can go a long way. And when you do that, I think people appreciate it overall. And I think when I tell people that they shouldn't use hyperbaric therapy, they also eventually, at first, they may not like me because I'm like, well, this is why I asked you to talk to me. But then over the long term, they're like, okay, this is why you said, and this is the way to do it. And look, I have a chamber at my house. I use hyperbaric therapy all the time in patients and clients. I work with clinics all over the world that have hyperbaric chambers that integrate it with other tools and technology. But I was just my order of operations with clients is trying to optimize foundational health markers first, unless it's an acute issue. Then, of course, I'll use the chambers if I think it's important, and I'll do my educationally throwing shit at the wall strategy, which is doing what I think is educationally going to help them from my experience without the data. But data is great and really helpful, and um, in essence, we need ways to help people right now while they're on the longer path to optimizing their health. And so that's what Transcriptions was started for, the company, and that's the products that we have for for sleep, for stress, for the mitochondria. We have another one called Blue Canatine, which has a combination of methylene blue with nicotine, caffeine, and CBD. That one's a little bit more of a focus, get things done kind of formula. Really great for brain fog as well. If you have Hashimoto's and you have a lot of brain fog and you tolerate caffeine, it's a great option overall because the little bit of nicotine in there shouldn't be scary for you. It's very safe and it's very anti-inflammatory overall, great for cognition. So we've had a lot of great success over there, and I've seen people weaning themselves off of various medications with practitioner support, using methylene blue as well now, which is very exciting. So I think there's a lot of potential there, to really help in a lot of ways right now while people are on that longer path. So
It's interesting. The process for me getting into integrative medicine has been a lot of unlearning because for a while it was like nicotine's bad, but it's like, okay, well, it's actually problematic when you're smoking tobacco, right? But the nicotine as a molecule in therapeutic dosages can actually be very helpful. Do you tell people where they can find out more about your products as well as your practice and your practitioner training?
yeah, there's a lot there. So my clinical practice websites. So from my health optimization medicine framework, where I work with optimizing foundational health markers, that's my personal practice is home-sf.co. If you're interested in hyperbaric medicine, hyperbaric consultation, learning more about that, that's my other website. It's integrativehbot.com. The nonprofit itself, Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, that website, I think you just put in the comments there, is homehope.org as well. So if you're a clinician that is interested in learning how to optimize the health of your patients and clients by taking a very different perspective on reversing longevity markers and looking more at health span, holobiontology, as we were describing before. You can check it out. We have a 7-module certification. The first module is our foundational one called Metabolomics. It's a fantastic one. I'm one of the faculty there, and I help with the teaching. Then we have our for-profit, which is called Transcriptions, and that's at Transcriptions on Instagram and also transcriptions.com. We have tons of blogs and articles on methylene blue, on GABA, on all the different ingredients that are in Trocom and Troz, the products that I mostly focused on today. I think those are the major places to go. And on Instagram, it's at Transcriptions, and my personal is at Dr. Scott Sherr, DrScottSherr.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We'll put all of those in the show notes as well.
Yeah,
I didn't go to this presentation, but my friend shared a Google Doc with me with her notes from the presentation because she thought I would love, we just kind of nerd out with each other.
sure.
But contraband notes that we share with each other, don't tell anybody. But I think they were
Nobody knows
using
now. Yeah.
blue for ADHD, right?
So yeah, and so this is interesting, right? So I get the question a lot about ADHD and methylene blue, and also something we have there in our armamentarium of the blue canatine that we have, which is the nicotine, caffeine, and CBD, because we know that one blue canatine does feel like stimulants for most people, and I have been
Oh,
able clinically to wean people off of stimulants using it over time. Again, working with practitioner guidance. Do not stop your medications before talking to your practitioner. But pure methylene blue in kids with ADHD symptoms, I have seen have significant improvement overall. They are highly metabolic children overall. They do not need as much, but they do have mitochondrial dysfunction oftentimes as a result of the symptoms that they're having, or because of the symptoms they're having, or chicken before the egg kind of thing. But yes, I have seen significant benefit there. Um, Oftentimes it's very low doses, and again, titrating the dose and very close clinical supervision. But it is an option, I think, and a better option oftentimes than putting kids on stimulants. And I usually reserve the blue cannatine for older kids, at least if I'm going to be using it in my practice, or clinicians are using it, like kids that have gone through puberty. But if you have to have is your question, it's a question whether what you want your kids to be on is really what it comes down to. So
Yeah, that's fair enough.
yeah.
Can I find dosing for methylene blue on one of your websites?
Yeah. So on our website, on transcriptions.com, you'll get some information on our blogs about dosing. And I think the key, as I was trying to emphasize here today, is that do not overdose yourself. And I don't mean overdose in like a way that you're going to have to go to the hospital. I just mean that you think you won't feel very good if you take too much. Okay. Typically 4 milligrams, 8 milligrams, 16, 25 milligrams. These are the doses that are most well tolerated and the most effective for most people. If you have a severe issue, if you have significant issues, you may need to go higher doses for sure. If you have an acute issue, as I mentioned, like I have all my patients keep a higher dose methylene blue in their medicine cabinet. We have a low dose called Just Blue, which is 16 milligrams. We have a higher dose called Tro Plus Blue, which is for practitioners only, and that's 50s, the 5 zeros. So you can't purchase that online if you're not a practitioner. If you are, you can sign up for an account with us, and you can get access to our full practitioner dashboard and some practitioner-only products as well. But the Just Blue is what I use mostly for patients over the years and clients.
I was going to show off my practitioner version.
There you go. Nice. That's a Pro Plus. I have the regular one here. This is the Just Blue here. So
And the nice thing about these is that they're like scored. Um, Being a pharmacist, I'm always impressed with the formulations. So you can actually like cut a little tiny piece of it and utilize that instead of, having to swallow a whole thing. And they're pre-cut, so or they're scored so you can cut them much easier.
yeah, you could take just a quarter, a half, or a full. And so I typically recommend with the Just Blue, for example, start off with a quarter for like 3 days. If you don't have any major effect, then go to a half, then go to 3 quarters, then go to a full. Every 3 to 5 days, increasing your dose until you start feeling better. And then once you find your right dose, depending on what you're taking it for, you can just take it periodically at that dose, or you can take it more regularly because it's helping you and you're doing it more for a chronic thing. And so in some of my patients, I keep them on for 2 weeks and I start weaning them down. Other people, I keep them on for 6 months before I start weaning them down, depending on the situation.
My questions for you, are there any wellness hacks that you refuse to participate in?
the first one that comes to the first one that comes to mind is perineal sunning. So
That's a really good one. Yeah. What do you have against it?
I mean, red light on your genitals is cool. Like there is some studies on like red light therapy on your testicles increasing testosterone level. I have seen that study. I don't. It's one study. I don't even know if it's a study, but there's something there. So I don't think that's a problem. Like sitting in front of your red light panel, getting mitochondrial activation. But I don't think you need to be, perineal or rectal sunning to say it in the nicer ways. So
I just feel like that would be a very uncomfortable sunburn.
yes, that it's highly very vascular mucosa, not something that you really want to get a sunburn on. Yeah.
Doesn't sound fun. Most outlandish thing you've done for your health?
Most outlandish thing that I've done. That's a good question. I'm thinking, I don't have a good answer for this one, I think of. Um,
It's a slippery slope when you've been on this journey for a while.
I know, I'm like, what is like outlandish that I've done? Like, I've had to like try all of our compounds at very high doses before, and like that, it felt kind of outlandish at the time. Um, I think one of the more outlandish, I think it felt outlandish at the time, I guess, was that I fasted for 5 days. Like that felt very outlandish. I haven't done it since. I did it once, and I don't think you need to fast for that long to get the same benefits overall. But it was good. But it was like most people aren't going to fast for 5 days. Like that's the best I can do. That's the best I can think of right now. So
That's a pretty good one. I did a juice fast, and like about halfway through, I started getting Facebook ads from my favorite restaurant that they were having a pig roast, and I just saw it as a sign from the universe that I should just end my fast quickly, and like the first one in line, to
nicely done. Nicely done. Yeah, I know there's other things. I mean, I tend to, like, put a lot of things together, so I have, like, a hyperbaric chamber and, like, I'll put something on my face, on my nose, like, on my belly, like, weird things like that, but I don't know, that sounds kind of outlandish, I guess, yeah.
Do you have any guilty pleasures that would throw people off if they saw you in public? If they were like, "Wait, is that Dr. Scott Sherr? Is he what is he doing?"
Well, I used to love cookies and french fries, like, those are, like, my 2, like, guilty pleasures when I was younger. So, like, whenever, like, I don't eat them very often, but, like, whenever my kids, like, have a birthday or something like that, like, they force me to eat cake, right? And so I freaking love it. So I'll have, like, whatever it is, like, I'll eat it, whatever, you know. That's like my guilty pleasure is gonna be like, if you see me like my kid's birthday party, I'm gonna be eating cake. So
I love it. You can't, say no to cake, and I feel like kids are a great gateway drug to, like, get you to get into some of those habits. I know I've been eating a lot of chicken nuggets just because, they're leftover.
exactly, yeah. So what I tell my kids all the time, is like, if there's sugar, if there's ice cream, they're like, "Well, dad, you just don't like ice cream. That's why you don't eat it." I'm like, "No, I love ice cream. I don't eat it because it doesn't make me feel good." They're like, "Wait, you love it, but you don't eat it?" Like, they just don't understand, like, that you could have, like, that separation. So you won't find me eating cake very often, except if it's like, I have 4 kids, so it's like 4 times a year, I guess, that I eat cake. So
My husband implements a dad tax whenever our son gets, like, some sweets or cookies or whatever, he'll be like, "Dad tax."
I know the dad tax well. Yeah, I don't have that dad tax too often, except for something that, that I'd like. But cake is it's 4 times a year. So
Yeah, that's called balance, right?
I try.
Dr. Scott, thank you so much for joining us here and the work that you do and for taking the time to share all these insights with us. It's been such a pleasure having you here. And hopefully, everybody listening, you've been able to have some takeaways from this conversation. And this has been a good part of your healing journey. Till next time.